Welcome to the first episode of the Viewsroom with Cat White. I'm your host, Catherine White, managing editor of SouthernTierLife.com, a regional lifestyle website that shines a spotlight on the people, events, attractions, and businesses in and around the Southern Tier of New York State. Previously, I worked for the Elmiran Star-Gazette as a features reporter and columnist for almost 10 years, before moving with my sister and nephew to Austin, Texas in 2010. March marked my first year anniversary of running Southern Tier Life, and it's been an exciting, frustrating, frightening, and humbling learning experience. I've been fortunate to have the support of so many friends, family, and generous people from the region who've helped out either by providing content, story ideas and sources, or through advertising and sponsorship on the website. I truly appreciate the support and interest STL and I have received this past year. I'm excited to start this new journey of hosting a podcast. So first, let me tell you a little bit about myself. I've always wanted to be a writer for as long as I can remember, but probably really actually around the age of 7. When I was younger, I thought I'd be a fiction writer, and then later, I wanted to be a screenwriter. I always gravitated towards the literary and humanities courses in college, but not journalism. Although, I did write my first op-ed when I was attending Corning Community College, which is now a SUNY school. I had done a lot of poetry writing and short story writing at CCC, and one of my English professors had suggested that I write something for the CCC paper, The Crier. So my first op-ed, and actually my only op-ed, was about mutual masturbation as a form of safe sex. I did grow up in the age of AIDS and HIV in the 1980s was when I was, 90s actually, the 1990s was when I attended CCC. I graduated from EFA in 1989. I grew up at a time when there was no cure for AIDS, and Dr. Fauci was hated by progressives instead of conservatives. I do seem to recall my column got quite a response, and it gave me a taste of the immediate gratification journalism can provide. So when I first applied to work at the Star-Gazette as a news assistant, I was not hired. They cited lack of education. So even though I had my associate's degree, it was a general liberal arts degree that I had received from them. So I returned a few years later with my bachelor's from SUNY New Paltz in English literature and creative writing. And the position just happened to be available again when I returned to the Southern Tier. So this time I was hired. You can hear a little bit more detail about that in a really cool kind of side podcast or sub podcast of the Viewsroom, which is called the Viewsroom on Zoom with Pife and AWAC. And I co-host the podcast with my former Star-Gazette newsroom colleague, Jim Pfeiffer, who was a humor columnist and a reporter with the Star-Gazette, but he also currently is writing a column, has a blog. So we just did our first podcast a couple weeks ago, and it's up on the Viewsroom webpage on SouthernTierLife.com. So check that out, and you can hear a little bit about our combined histories at the Elmiran Star-Gazette when we worked together. But one of the things that I'm really proud of from my Star-Gazette days are the stories I wrote about LGBTQ plus issues, including stories about families trying to make a life in the Twin Tiers, and local pride celebrations and drag shows and social meetups taking place throughout the region. One of my favorite stories was actually a really creative piece. It was a pictures and words that the features department was working out, where you kind of take one picture or a couple of different pictures and then do kind of your article or story is kind of a description of that. It's a little bit more artistic and creative than a regular feature story that we were writing. So the one that I did was I got to shadow the drag queen Bianca, getting access to the dressing room at the alternative dance club Angles, while Bianca, who's also known as Ron Gallant, and several other well-known local drag queens prepped for a busy night. I have to say it was magical and impressive to see these men transform into glamazons. And this was in 2003, y'all. So this was, 20 years ago, in the Southern Tier. And, pretty much from that point on, or even before that, I was hooked on drag shows. I was able to judge quite a few of them, and it was such a serious deal. RuPaul's drag show is very accurate to the things that we had to judge these performers and entertainers on. But it was also wonderful. It was a great community to see. It was a very huge family, dysfunctional family, as most families are. But it was a great community to be a part of while I worked for the Star Gazette. And I got many, many stories from there. But it's kind of amazing to me that now we're going through all of this recent brouhaha in Texas and other closed-minded conservative states over drag queens. It's bewildering to me, especially with the popularity of drag-centric shows like RuPaul's Drag Race, which is now in its 16th season, and the HBO series We're Here, which features RuPaul's Drag Race alum Bob the Drag Queen, Shangela, and Eureka O'Hara, who go to small-minded towns across the country, meeting with the LGBTQ plus community members. Usually that's who's summoned them to the area. And they produce a public drag show to celebrate tolerance and self-acceptance and self-love. It's a really great show that'll make you laugh, cry, and shake your groove thing. And actually, both of those incredible popular and mainstream shows do that. So all of this craziness now of legislation that is banning drag queens and drag queen performances is just insane to me. But I'm so glad to see the drag queen presence is still going strong in the Southern Tier. In fact, this upcoming Sunday, the 16th, the Park Church in Elmira is hosting Trisha's Drag Show Brunch, which starts at 1 p.m. And then on Saturday, April 22nd, the Mr. and Miss Gay Elmira pageant is being held at 6 p.m. at the Loom in Waverly. And that's going to have a back to the 80s theme. So I'm sure that's going to be a complete blast. And then there's also a drag story hour with Miss Vanessa La Diva in May at the Card Carrying Books and Gifts in Corning. So there's quite a few representatives of drag entertainment in the Southern Tier, and I'm really glad to see that continues on, and there's that support there. But you can get details on those events and others on Southern Tier Life's events page. So, okay, that's it for this first episode of the Viewsroom with Cat White. You can expect new episodes just like this weekly. And once a month, we'll have the Viewsroom on Zoom with Pipe and AWAC, as I mentioned before. That's just a little side gig, and you'll hear some fun conversations between Jim and I and get kind of that unique perspective of the journalistic perspective from the both of us. Thank you to our sponsors, Reed Media Group Radio and Black Cat Media. And there are advertising and sponsorships available for both podcasts. So for information, you can email info.southerntierlife@gmail.com. And until next time, I hope you have a groovy day. Take care.